Konami has created some of gaming's most beloved gaming franchises over the past 40 years. Among them Metal Gear, Castlevania, Silent Hill, and many, many more. While Silent Hill and in a way Metal Gear are looking to make a comeback in the coming years, fans of these franchises know all too well that the companies seem to have mostly turned their back on producing high-caliber AAA console games for the past decade or so. While abandoning such great franchises should almost be considered a crime in itself, multiple people online have suggested that Konami had actual ties to the criminal underworld, namely the Yakuza, Japan's notorious crime groups. Some even claimed that Konami is, in fact, run by the Yakuza. With so many people in my own comment section telling me similar things, I was curious. Is there any truth to the claims made by people online saying that Konami has ties to the Yakuza? Today, we will take a closer look at Konami's history, their involvement in the Pachinko business, and their toxic work environment. With that, we will hopefully be able to decide if these rumors are either the truth, nonsense, or maybe something in between the two. This is the story of Konami and the Yakuza rumors. In March of 1969, a 29-year-old Osaka resident by the name of Kozuki Kagemasa decided to start his own business, a humble repair and rental shop for jukeboxes, which was officially incorporated under the name Konami in 1973. The word Konami simply combines the first two letters of the names of Kozuki and his two founding partners, Nakama Yoshinobu and Miyasako Tatsuo. Not the most creative name I've ever heard, but Konami does have a nice ring to it. The company stuck to repairing and renting out jukeboxes for a few years, until the late 70s, when they noticed the rise in popularity of coin-operated arcade machines, including games like Space Invaders, Galaxian, and Breakout. Kozuki saw huge potential in the arcade machine market, and soon had his company create their own games, which were mostly clones of existing games in the beginning. Konami had its first smash hit when they released Frogger, which was later also ported to consoles like the Atari 2600 and later the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was also around this time that our first alleged connection between Konami and Yakuza groups can be found. In the book The Ultimate History of Video Games by Stephen L. Kent, there is a whole chapter dedicated to the Yakuza's involvement in the arcade industry in the late 70s and early 80s. One tiny part of this chapter, only 2 sentences to be exact, tells an interesting story related to Konami's early history, which goes as follows. One clan tried to take over Konami, the company that made Frogger and Contra. When the owner of the company appealed to a friend in the rival clan for help, he touched off a war and had to go into hiding. Not only does this story claim that company founder Kozuki had a friend inside a Yakuza gang, it also implies that he unintentionally kicked off a gang war. This story would indeed be some very good proof of Konami having Yakuza ties in the past. There is just one big problem. Except for these 2 sentences inside this very specific book, I was not able to find any further mentions of this story anywhere on the internet. With only one source reporting this one, and the complete lack of detail provided by the story, I would remain very skeptical about it, as interesting as it may seem. In the mid-1980s, Konami truly became a household name when they started producing games made with computers and consoles in mind. In a matter of only a few years, Konami was able to create multiple successful games and franchises, including Castlevania, Contra, and Gradius on the NES. At the same time, a promising young game designer by the name of Kojima Hideo wrote and designed a little game called Metal Gear for Japanese home computers, which was not only a revolutionary game, but also the start of a multi-billion-dollar franchise. His next game, Snatcher, was a milestone in video game narrative design and established Konami not only as a successful, but also as an innovative video game company. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, Konami continued to release many classic titles like the Metal Gear Solid games, their very own horror game franchise Silent Hill, and the dating simulation Tokimeki Memorial. The company did well by releasing one fantastic game after another, but they also started branching off into other types of businesses very early on. For example, they were the producers of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game, which has seen worldwide success and is one of the biggest games in the genre. Konami also has its own sports business, providing fitness and health products, while also running a chain of fitness clubs in Japan. Konami must be one of only a few companies that let you park your ass on the couch to play video games and then also provide you with a healthy dose of physical exercise. However, out of all their non-video game related businesses, only one is important to our story: Konami's involvement with the Pachinko business, which is one of the two main reasons which makes people want to connect Konami to organized crime. So let's learn a bit about Pachinko itself, its connection to the Yakuza, and how Konami might fit into all of this. Konami's first foray into the world of gambling came in the year 1992, when they started producing parts for Pachinko machines. In 2006, they got into the actual distribution of their own Pachinko machines, which is a business that they have only become even more involved in since then. I'm sure that those among you who avidly read gaming news are familiar with the disappointment of being excited for an announcement involving a famous Konami franchise like Silent Hill or Metal Gear, only to be greeted with the announcement of a Pachinko machine involving such franchises. I think that most of us have seen one of these crazy machines before and asked ourselves, how do these things even work? Well, the easiest way to describe Pachinko is by calling it a mix of a pinball machine and a slot machine. Basically, you buy a bunch of metal balls which you put inside the machine. Then, you try to shoot them into a maze of metal pins with just the right amount of force and hope that they drop into the right pockets. Depending on where the balls land, you receive more and more of them, which can then be exchanged for prizes at the counter. It's kind of similar to that wooden board with the metal pins from Shenmue, if you've ever played that game before. If you want to see some Pachinko machines in action and learn a bit more about their history, I highly recommend checking out Abroad in Japan's fantastic video about the topic, which I will put a link to in the description. It is important to note that in Japan, gambling for money prizes is against the law. Because of this, the metal balls are exchanged for special prize tokens instead of actual money at Pachinko parlors. However, there's an easy way around this. Near Pachinko parlors, you'll find vendors that will buy your tokens for cash. The tokens are then sold back to the Pachinko parlor for the same money that they paid for them, plus a small commission fee. With this legal loophole, it is possible for Pachinko players to actually play for money. Speaking of money, the Pachinko business makes a lot of it, and I mean a lot. Each year, Japanese gamblers spend around $200 billion on trying their luck with the shiny metal balls. Just for comparison, that's 30 times as much money as Las Vegas makes annually. With that kind of money involved, it's clear why the government might turn a blind eye to loopholes like the one mentioned before. But it also attracts a very specific group of people, members of the criminal underworld. It is no secret that the Yakuza and gambling have been best friends for centuries. As I explained in my very first video about the origins of the Yakuza, the Japanese crime groups are descendants of both peddlers and gamblers, the latter known by the name Bakuto. With the Yakuza having been involved in the gambling business for multiple centuries, it would make sense for them to be heavily involved in Pachinko as well, right? Well, maybe. At least, the Yakuza tried their best to make it big in the Pachinko industry since the 1960s. Whether they succeeded or not is a whole nother story. Multiple sources claim that the Japanese police has put in a lot of effort to keep the Yakuza away from Pachinko, and successfully so. Of course, reports from the Japanese government and police about driving back the Yakuza always has to be taken with a grain of salt. But it does seem like retired policemen are actually more involved with Pachinko than any crime syndicate in Japan. Of course, that doesn't mean that the Yakuza are not involved at all. Just 2 years ago, in 2021, a news story broke about the arrest of Nozawa Kengo, who ran an illegal pachinko parlor in Tokyo. The parlor was claimed to have made around 100 million yen in revenue, a part of which was funneled into an unnamed crime syndicate. Another news story reported about a group of pachinko parlor owners from Fukuoka Prefecture who decided to band together in order to drive out the Yakuza from their businesses. One of the owners paid around 40 million yen in protection money to the local Kudokai gang over a span of 15 years. So let's try to connect this all to Konami, since many people claim that Pachinko is where their Yakuza ties actually come from. I tried all different kinds of keywords in order to find some clear evidence that someone at Konami was somehow involved with criminal organizations through their Pachinko business. I tried searching for evidence in 3 different languages, including Japanese, but all I could find were English language forum posts claiming that Konami's Yakuza connections are an open secret and that they are obviously in bed with the Yakuza because they also produce Pachinko machines. One blog post I found even claimed that Konami was a Yakuza front and a money laundering scheme. The post also said that by focusing on mobile gaming and Pachinko in recent times, they were trying to liquidate the company, which has outgrown its usefulness to the Yakuza, by destroying it from the inside. If that was the case, Konami would be doing the exact opposite at the moment. In 2022, they actually had the most profitable year in the company's history, largely driven by their gaming sector and also, in large part, Pachinko games. In the case of Sega, who also make Pachinko machines, there is hard evidence for potential ties with the Yakuza through the Pachinko industry. Just a few years ago, there was a shooting at the Sega semi-president's house, carried out by a member of the famous Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi crime syndicate. As long as there is no actual convincing reports or evidence similar to this which connects Konami's Pachinko business to the criminal underworld, I will continue to be very skeptical about this one, personally. After all, how can we connect the Yakuza to Konami if we are not even sure about their involvement in the Pachinko business in general? However, Pachinko isn't the only thing that people think ties Konami to the Yakuza. Another reason for these accusations may come from the company's inner workings themselves. While I was looking for information connecting Konami to the criminal underworld, I stumbled upon this heated discussion inside the comment section of a website. The comments mainly revolved around arcades and pachinko parlors in Japan, and how they are connected to the Yakuza. One user then mentions that it is, and I quote, already proven that Konami is a Yakuza business, and that being well known for shitty business and toxic inside culture is not possible without some kind of ties to the Yakuza. According to the commenter, no normal company would risk being seen as a black Kigyou. This comment section made me very curious about 2 things. What is a so-called black Kigyou, and how the hell are they in any way connected to the Yakuza? In Japan, the term black Kigyou has become widespread among employees and those still looking for a job. A black Kigyou or black corporation describes a company that is known for being home to extremely exploitative working conditions or toxic work culture. These conditions can include laughably low salaries, lack of overtime pay, long working hours, different types of harassment, and many, many more awful practices. To bring more attention to this problem, there is actually a so-called Black Corporation Award, given out annually to the worst company of the year in terms of treating employees like actual humans. For about a decade now, Konami seems to be doing its best, or in this case, its worst, to earn the title of Black Kigyou. It all started back in 2010, when a Konami-produced mobile phone game by the name of Dragon Collection started doing exceptionally well. Only a few years later, in 2015, Konami was restructured completely, mostly steering away from the expensive production of AAA console games to making cheaper to produce and more profitable mobile games. As the company's focus shifted, so did its internal work climate. Many disturbing details came to light in August of 2015 in an article by financial newspaper Nikkei. Konami reportedly had employees leaving work for lunch monitored with the use of time cards, with those leaving their desk for too long then publicly shamed by having their names announced over a loudspeaker. There were also cameras installed inside the company's corridors that were not meant to be used for security purposes, but to instead monitor the movement of employees.
A surveillance camera?
Konami game developers who were deemed by the upper management to be useless were relegated to jobs completely separate from game development. This did not only affect junior members of the team, but even senior members who had been at Konami for quite some time were reportedly assigned to jobs like security guards, cleaning staff at Konami's fitness clubs, or at their Pachinko factories. Even those who had left Konami were not safe from harassment by their former employer. One ex-Konami employee announced on his private Facebook page that he was leaving Konami and got a job elsewhere. In response, Konami punished remaining staff who liked his post by assigning them to new roles like the ones mentioned before. The biggest story that came from all of this turmoil inside Konami was, of course, their falling out with Kojima Hideo. By 2015, Kojima had been an integral part of the company for almost 30 years. Not only that, but while working for Konami, he had become one of the few video game directors who were truly a household name in the industry, with his name presented proudly on the packaging of games that he directed. While Konami's toxic practices were revealed to the public, Kojima was wrapping up production on his highly anticipated game Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, and was also working on a sequel to the Silent Hill franchise. Soon, it became clear that Konami even managed to piss off their most valuable employee. On March 16, 2015, Konami's corporate restructuring came into effect. On that exact day, Kojima's name was removed from the official Metal Gear Solid 5 website and every piece of marketing material associated with the game. Kojima was also reportedly put into a separate room from the rest of his team for the final 6 months of development of the game, only being allowed to communicate with his co-workers through the company's own servers. After almost 3 decades at Konami, Kojima left the company after the release of MGS5, leaving behind a game that was commercially successful as well as critically acclaimed. His Silent Hill sequel never saw the light of day, and its demo, which is considered to be a horror masterpiece, was removed from the PlayStation Store by Konami. Kojima has since formed a new independent development studio under the name Kojima Productions. Even with Kojima distancing himself from Konami, his former employer still landed in the news for targeting employees of his new company. Nikkei, the same newspaper that first reported about Konami's toxic work environment, released an article in 2017 about the company blacklisting former Konami employees looking for a new job in the Japanese gaming industry. Konami seems to focus on Kojima's new studio more than anything though. An executive of Kojima Productions stated that when the company applied for health insurance at a company by the name of ITS Kenpo, their application was quickly denied. Turns out that one of the higher-ups at that exact insurance company is also a board member at Konami. What a coincidence. As a final example of how toxic Konami really is, I want to quickly mention a very recent news story from April of 2023 about an employee of the company who attempted to murder his former boss at the company with a fire extinguisher. The employee testified that he did this out of frustration due to his boss using his higher position at Konami to harass his subordinates. It seems that in those 8 years since Konami first received all that negative press, not much has changed. Now that we have established that Konami definitely meets the criteria required to be a black Kigyou, we should find out if that also means that they have ties to the Yakuza. The short answer to this question, if you ask me, is no. While there is a lot of crossover between black Kigyou companies and involvement with organized crime, it is completely possible to be a toxic company in Japan without any ties to the criminal underworld. If we look at all the things that Konami has been accused of back in 2015, none of it requires the help of criminals. Monitoring employees with the help of cameras, relegating them to different positions in the company, and abusing your power as a superior can all be done free of Yakuza influences. If, for example, Konami had the Yakuza kidnap someone on their behalf, like Sega allegedly did in the 90s, then things would be a lot clearer. But simply being a toxic company, in my opinion, does not automatically imply a relationship with criminals. So, with everything that we've talked about, I'd like to give my conclusion about the rumors mentioned in this video. In my opinion, the information that does exist about Konami and the Yakuza is simply not enough to definitively pin down a clear connection. The Pachinko theory is plausible, but lacks evidence, while the company's toxic work environment does not require the help of gangsters and has not yet been proven to employ such help. Out of all the stories presented today, the one with the most potential was reported by only one source, which brought forward almost no convincing information and barely qualifies for a rumor, if you ask me. As a whole, I will say that Konami might have had Yakuza connections at some point. Actually, I'd be pretty surprised if they didn't. The reason why I believe that Konami is somehow involved with organized crime is the fact that almost no big Japanese company seems to be completely free of such ties. While talking about his experience with Yakuza in the video game business, a former Japanese game developer, interviewed in the book The Untold History of Japanese Game Developers Volume 2, stated that the only companies that have been able to do business while staying clean are probably Nintendo and Namco. If everyone except Nintendo and Namco possibly has Yakuza ties, that would imply that Konami is part of that group as well. However, convincing proof does either not exist at all, or is something that the world has not yet heard about. So, what's your opinion on this whole topic? Did you find some real proof that Konami had actual Yakuza ties? Tell us in the comments. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you're looking for my sources, I will put those in the description box below. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Sayonara.